The journey back to yourself. Beneath the moonlit sky, when the city finally unclenched its jaw and softened into night, Aaron stood at the window of his small flat and watched the moon lay a pale ribbon across the river. He had learned, over many sleepless months, that night had its own kind of honesty. The noise that had once filled his days, meetings, messages, the steady pressure of being always on, thinned away under the moon's patient light. In that thinning there was space, a tiny, tremulous room where an older, quieter wanting had begun to speak. Tonight, that wanting hummed through him like heat through a pane of glass. His life had been a careful construction, tidy routines, predictable hours, a reliable job that gave him the means to live comfortably. But comfort, he was discovering, was not the same as contentment. There was a hollow room inside him, lit only by the memory of simpler mornings and the sound of laughter that belonged to another place. He pressed his forehead to the cool glass and let the city's light wash across his closed eyes. You might recognize this hush. A hush that sits between breaths, full of questions you have not dared to ask aloud. Aaron breathed into that hush now. He thought of the map folded in the top drawer of his desk, the one he had not opened in years. For as long as he could remember, his mother spoke of the coast where she was born, the small town, the terraced gardens, the smell of lemon trees when the wind turned. She had left when she was young, bringing with her the taste of certain herbs and the way the sea carved the morning light. Aaron had always listened to those stories with the polite curiosity of a child who knows they will be returning to school in the afternoon. But the memory of his mother's voice had become something else, a call that twined with the moonlight and tugged at him. When the city's clamor quieted, he unfolded the map that night and traced the coastline with a finger, as if the paper were warm. Somewhere along that shore, beneath a moon similar to the one he watched, people moved with the sun's rhythm, and summer smelled of bread and citrus. He had never been, but the map felt less like paper and more like a promise. He let his thumb linger on a small island marked in fine script. The island had no promises of riches or fame. It offered instead an invitation to slow. The decision did not arrive with dramatic thunder. It arrived with the steady, almost cautious certainty of a tide. He gave notice at work in a letter written with small, careful handwriting. He told his sister Hugh would be gone for a time. She laughed, then cried, a sound he realized he had been holding back for years. He packed a single bag with only the things he thought he might need: a warm sweater, a notebook, a small spoon that had been his grandmother's, and an apron folded with care. He closed the flat behind him with a gentle click and stepped into the night, into the moonlight path that had been calling him all along. The journey was a soft, unwinding. Trains took him away from glass towers and the river's steel reflection and delivered him to an airport where the salt air seemed an old friend. The plane lifted him into a sky where clouds were low and slow, and from his window he watched evening gather and spill over the land like a shawl. When the plane descended, the lights below were scattered like scattered thoughts, until the coast emerged, a ribbon of calmer light, a darker interior where olive groves and terraces turned, like the slow steps of a dance. He arrived on the island in the early hour, when the world was still taking its first breath of day. The air tasted of sage and sea, cool on the tongue. The guest house door was opened by a pair of hands that smelled of rosemary and sunlight. Maria and Nikas, the hosts, welcomed him with a kind of slowness that made time itself feel better. Mannered, they led him to a small room that looked out across an expanse of blue. The balcony door framed the sea like a painting, and the moon, now waning, lingered still on the horizon, though the first days were gentle and unremarkable in the loveliest way. There were no urgent emails to answer, no deadlines to chase. There was, instead, the ritual of waking to the kettle's soft whistle, the walk to the tiny market where lemons hung heavy on a branch, the exchange of who knows what forward with a woman who sold cheese wrapped in paper and smiled as if she had all the time in the world. Aaron learned to do things with his hands again. He learned to knead dough until it sighed. He learned to listen to the rhythm of fire, how soon to add olive oil, when oregano would yield its heat, when tomatoes softened into a sweet, slow confession. Nature became his companion and his tutor. Mornings he would walk into the hills, sandals whispering on scrubby path, the thin earth rising to meet his curiosity. The island taught him to be awake in a different register, not with the frantic, achievement-laced hunger of the city, but with a calm attention that asks only that you notice. He watched A.B. calibrate itself from flower to flower. He watched how shadows moved differently here, slow and long and truthful. The air tasted of salt and thyme. Evenings smelled of simmering onions and distant fires. At night, he sat on the balcony and watched the moon widen and thin, and with it his own edge. He thought about the life he had left behind. The nice apartment, the reliable salary, the soft cushion of habits. He did not regret the life so much as he realized how much of himself he had left in the shape of obligations, each one neat and labeled. The island made it easy to look at those things from a distance. When the thought of the city came, it was like a photograph he could set down. It no longer weighed him. There were moments that felt like old grief coming home under a new roof. One evening, as a storm moved through the sea, Aaron found himself walking along a coastal path, the wind pulling at his jacket. The surf threw its voice against the rocks, a long, steady beating that sounded for a moment like his own heart. He thought of his father's hands, the calluses of someone who had loved with labor rather than speech, and he felt a grief that had been stored neatly in his chest, loosened like a lid. He stood on the cliff and let the rain wash the tightness from his temples. The storm did not break him, it broke the hardened seam that had been keeping him small. When he returned to the guest house, Maria offered him a cup of hot tea and sat with him in companionable silence. There are kinds of comfort that require no words. She made him lemon cake, and the act of sharing something warm rented out a small corner in his chest, reserved for company. The island also encouraged him to remember the sacred in small gestures. He learned to forage for hives with Maria at dawn. They moved through the garden, cavity by cavity, naming leaves and seeds with the reverence of caretakers. She showed him the proper way to strip rosemary from its stem, to press oregano between finger and thumb, to release an oil so fragrant it could bring tears. One evening, she placed a small bowl of dried herbs between them and told him stories of the elders, days when the land had fed them, and the recipes were prayers that read as instructions for being human. Aaron began to record these recipes in his notebook, not as a cookbook so much as a ledger of memory. He wrote the taste of a particular winter, the sound of his sister laughing at a bowl of stew. The simple practice of recording rooted his life back into a narrative that he could touch. Sleep came easier now, but dreams became deeper, threaded with images he had kept away. One night, he dreamt he was a child again, running barefoot across a hill of wildflowers, the wind knowing his name. In the dream, he came upon an old olive tree, whose trunk was split by years like the open pages of a book. In that split, there was a hollow glowing with a gentle light, and when he reached inside, he pulled out a handful of seeds. Each seed felt like a memory, small, dense with weight. He woke with them in his palms, though the room was empty. The dream did not instruct him so much as it reminded him that there was a storied lineage inside him, a series of small inheritances that did not belong to others but were meant for him to plant. The island's rhythm taught him patience. He had come wanting a cure, a decisive pivot that would rearrange his life into something recognizably new. But what arrived was subtler. It was in the practice of making olive oil scones until the dough felt right. It was in the afternoon he spent repairing a broken chair's leg under Nico's careful eye, and, in doing so, learning how to breathe through frustration. It was in the way children of the village would call out to each other and their laughter would echo across a field, unbothered by performance. He watched them play and felt a looseness he had not felt since he was young. One evening, as the sun folded into the sea, Aaron walked to a nearby cove and found an old woman sitting on a rock. She had a small basket of fish and a headscarf patterned with tiny stars. Up close, her face was a map of years, lines formed by laughter, by wind, by the habit of smiling through trouble. She motioned with a calloused finger for Aaron to sit. They did not speak for a long time. The sea spoke instead, constant and patient. After it had spoken, she turned to him and said, simply, "Listen to what you missed." He expected to name something immediate, family, warmth, the smell of bread. But the answer that rose out of him was less tidy. "I miss the unplanned hour," he said. "I miss being led by curiosity rather than schedule. I miss the act of starting something without knowing the end." The old woman nodded as if she had been waiting for him to notice this. She pulled from her basket a small stone, smooth and warm. "Keep it," she said. "When you forget, hold it, and remember the way the wind sounded today. The world is made up of remembered breaths." On the day he decided to leave the island, it was not because he felt finished. It was because the island had taught him enough. That remaining felt like indulgence. He had planted seeds in a small patch of earth behind the guest house. Basil and Thyme had taken to him as if he were a familiar, and in return they taught him discipline without judgment. He had made friends, a teacher who played the bouzouki on slow nights, a fisherman who took him out to sea and showed him where the water's color changed and told him that was where life whispered its secret. He had found a recipe, not just for food but for life's pace. Wake with the light, work with your hands, listen, and when the moon rose, be still. The journey back to the city felt different than the way out. The plane carried him not as an exile but as someone who now had a second language, the language of small, deliberate joys. Back in London, things hummed with the same urgency, but he kept a pocket of island rhythm within his chest. He learned to cook with slowness at home. He invited his sister for dinner, and for the first time in years, they talked without the pressure of gaps to fill. He set aside mornings for walking without a destination and began, quietly, to remove the clearest edges of his obligations. He took a reduced hour contract that allowed him space to write and to tend to a small balcony box of irbs that reminded him of Maria's garden. It was not an easy to do transformation. There were days when the city's old gravity pulled at him and he felt smaller, the way a stone can sink in deep water. On those days, he would hold the smooth stone the old woman had given him, close his fingers around it, and breathe. He would remember the sound of the sea and the particular way the sun hit the olive leaf, and he would let those memories ferment into action rather than regret. Once, when the pressure at work threatened to overwhelm him, he took a walk to the river and sat until the moon rose. He imagined the island's slow kitchen and the act of passing a plate to someone you love without hurry. The moon listened, and it made room. Months later, he opened a small supper club in the evenings, a modest project begun as a plea to himself to keep the island's lessons alive. He cooked what he had learned, lemon cakes that remembered Maria's hands, simple stews that named seasons, salads that tasted like the shore after rain. People came not for spectacle but for the steadiness of a meal prepared with attention. Over time, their presence braided itself into his life like a comfortable garment. He found that nourishment returned things in him he had thought irretrievably lost. There are 1,000 small returns that make up the journey back to yourself. For Aaron, it was the habit of waking to morning light, the relearning of how to befriend uneventful hours, the remembering what it felt like to listen with patience. It was the courage to loosen the ties that were neat but misaligned, and the humility to learn, again, the small mechanics of bread and the seasons of plants. It was also, tenderly, the right to choose a life that fit differently than the one he had been given. On clear nights, when the moon was full and generous, he would sit on his balcony and imagine the island's horizon. He would feel a sense of gratitude that went beyond mere thanks, a gratitude that recognized the contour of his own life, like a map returned from the sea. He had not found a single, final answer, nor had he been given a catechism of how to live. Instead, he had been invited to notice, to plant, to cook, to sleep, to speak, and to listen. Those were small acts, but they were mighty enough to rearrange a life. If you find yourself at a window tonight, watching the moon lend its silver to the world, know that you, too, have small doors within you that open when given room. The journey back is seldom spectacular. It is patient and kind. It begins, often, with a single thing, a map in a drawer, a whispered wish, a cup of tea with someone who looks you in the eye. From there, it unfurls in quiet practices, in making bread, in repairing a chair, in learning the names of IAB. And when the work of living becomes loud again, you can hold a stone in your palm and remember the sea. Aaron's life never became perfect. He still had restless mornings, and there were nights when the old worry crept back like a thin mist. But he learned to welcome the mist as one part of weather rather than as a permanent climate. Beneath the moonlit sky, he began to mend himself, as one would mend a patchwork quilt, carefully, with gratitude for every thread. In those stitches, he found pieces he had longed for: curiosity, appetite, creative spark, the patient joy of making something meant to be shared. The moon rose on constant and calm, and somewhere beneath it, in a small kitchen or a silent balcony, someone else might be learning the same art of returning. Perhaps that someone is you. If so, hold your breath and let it go. Breathe in what calls, breathe out what no longer serves. Walk slowly. Notice the rosemary on the windowsill, the taste of lemon when you slice it, the sound of your own name when you think it aloud. Each small act will steady you, and in time you will know, with a quiet and certain knowing, the shape of your own homecoming. Sleep now, if you would. Let the moon be your lantern, and the sea its lullaby. The journey back is patient. It will wait, and it will meet you beneath a moonlit sky when you are ready.